Good morning, everyone. I'm John Leech, a scientist with APC Microbiome Ireland, Master at Teagasc in Moore Park. Today is World Microbiome Day, a day when we celebrate all things microbial, and with this year's theme, sustainability, we're highlighting all of the amazing ways microbes help to keep us and the planet healthy. I'm delighted to have Darina Allen from the Ballymaloe Cookery School on this call this morning. Darina, you and I share a passion for fermented foods. Maybe if I give a little background into what got me into fermented foods, then maybe I can ask you why you got into them.
Right.
So I started studying fermented foods just over 4 years ago. I joined Professor Paul Cotter's group in Moore Park in Teagasc, where a lot of work under Paul had already taken place on fermented foods such as water kefir and milk kefir. When I came along, Paul wanted to look at a wider diversity of fermented foods. So we actually got some samples from yourselves. That's how my project started. And I was lucky enough to do the Ballymaloe Fermented Food Cookery course because I hadn't a clue how to make a lot of these foods. And I guess it's a good time to explain why we're interested in studying these foods. So there's lots of good reasons to study fermented foods, but in recent years, the importance of the microbiome in terms of health has emerged. So the microbiome is the collection of microorganisms, bacteria, yeast, virus, that live in any ecosystem, but we're interested in the human microbiome. And all of our various body parts have different microbial ecosystems, and they all have functions or jobs that they carry out for us. We're very interested in the gastrointestinal microbiome. That's all the bugs that live within our gut. And these are really important for a lot of aspects of health. They regulate hormones, they stimulate our immune system, and they help us to break down our foods. We couldn't live without them. And in what we've noticed in the last 100, 150 years or so is that in Western modern world, our microbiomes have become a bit depleted. We know that diversity, the number of species in the microbiome, is usually a good indicator of health. And now that we sanitize our environments and our foods, we need to because of the risk of infectious diseases. But we've noticed that the westernized microbiome has become quite depleted in diversity compared to people living in more traditional parts of the world. And this loss of diversity is also associated with a lot of chronic diseases that we now get in the Western world, such as type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular health. So we're looking at fermented foods optimistically because they contain billions of live microbes, and this may be a way to replenish some of the microbes that we've lost as a result of all our sanitizing practices. So we look at the foods, we extract DNA from them, and using this DNA we're able to identify what microorganisms are there. And it's those microorganisms that are responsible not just for being there in the billions when you eat them, but they transform the food, make it more nutritional. So this is what we're trying to get a sense of when we study the food. So what was it, Darina, that brought your attention to fermented foods?
Well, no, it was sort of bizarre in a way and totally accidental, as many of the best things in life are. I was actually at a conference in the US, and you know the way often at those conferences there are lots of things running concurrently, and I looked at this particular slot and there was nothing that particularly interested me, and I thought, well, you know, whatever. So there was one particular session on fermented foods with somebody called Sandor Katz, whose name I may well be very familiar to you now. He's considered by many to be the king of fermentation. But anyway, I wandered in sort of aimlessly into this session, and my God, it nearly blew my mind. I couldn't believe what I was hearing and the importance of fermentation, how, you know, humans have eaten fermented foods forever and ever, and of course originally it was a way, part of survival, it was a way of preserving every single scrap of food, so that you use it for at another stage. And then, as you quite rightly emphasized there a few minutes ago, basically it hugely enhances the nutritional values. You get double or triple goodness from fermented foods. So anyway, I came back all fired up. He actually just showed us how to make very simple sauerkraut during his talk there, and that took the mystery out of sauerkraut for me too, because I always thought that was something I certainly couldn't attempt to do. And so I came home all fired up, and I pored over any literature or books I could find, and we put on our first fermentation course at the cooking school, and that's about 12, 15 years ago, I suppose now, and I knew a little bit more than the people I was teaching, but of course it's an absolutely huge subject, and truly, truly fascinating. I know that you're completely absorbed by it too, and doing ongoing research, which is terribly exciting to hear, because it's interesting, even though we've been eating fermented foods forever and ever, actually, in a funny way, very little research has been done about the effect on our health and our microbiome. So this is really an important area. But in a funny way, just another little thing, at the cooking school, when I'm talking about food safety and food hygiene quite often, one of the first questions I ask the students is, tell me, when I say the word bacteria or microbes, what do you think? Do you think good? Do you think bad? Do you think beneficial? Do you think pathogenic? And I get most of the class will say bad, because we're also indoctrinated now about bacteria everywhere, and then some will say, of course, good and bad, and of course that's the answer. But it's really microbes and bacteria are so misunderstood by those of us in the non-scientific community, because immediately it seems to bring up connotations and negative images. And so I have to impress on my students that a tiny percentage of bacteria and microbes are pathogenic, but typically they are a very high percentage, in the high 90s, as far as we understand, are actually really beneficial and incredibly important for our health and our very survival, as you were saying there. And of course, we as humans have coexisted with microbes and bacteria and all of the other variations, etc., forever and ever since time began. But and this is it's interesting, isn't it, John, that in this part of the Western world, that really it's only in the last, is it even 2 decades since this area of science has become such a hot topic to research? Because before that, here in Western medicine, in a way it seems that we almost ignored or knew very little about what was happening in the gut or what impact it was having on our overall health. Whereas in Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic medicine, they have been aware, of course, forever and ever, that basically the dialogue between the gut and the brain, that has really been recognized in Ayurvedic and Chinese healing traditions. But over here somehow we didn't, in Western medicine, but in Western medicine we failed until relatively recently to appreciate the complexity of how the brain and the gut and the microbiome all communicate with each other. But it's such an interesting area of study now, and at this point, and much of the pioneering research, as you say, was done in Cork, in UCC, with Professor Cryan and Professor Ted Dinan. They're leading the world in this area, and even though all of you would say there is so much more to be discovered, basically we know without any shadow of doubt at this stage that the health of our gut, our gut microbiome, is basically not only affects our physical but also our mental health. And so anything we can do to boost our immune system and our gut biome is of enormous importance to our health. And one of the areas, of course, is to eat fermented foods. And fermented foods, I mean, there are lots of fermented foods we're already eating, even if you're not eating sauerkraut. I mean, obviously, beer and wine and chocolate and all of that, sourdough bread, and so on. So, and I know you love making water and milk kefirs as well, don't you?
I do, yeah. You raised a couple of very interesting points there. I make the water kefir and sauerkraut and kimchi at home. You were saying, first of all, Sandor Katz's books are brilliant. After I did the cookery course then with you, I've went through one of his books, The Art of Fermentation, and it's a really good guide to get you stuck in to fermentation.
Yeah.
But you mentioned as well that the emergence of the microbiome and research into this in the last number of years. It's a very good point. I mean, fermented foods, there was a Russian scientist, Elie Metchnov, just over 100 years ago, who had initially started investigating fermented foods at milk kefir in the Caucasus, and what he noticed was that the local population were drinking this drink and living longer than many other populations. But not an awful lot of work has been done since Elie Metchnov, and I guess in the last 20 or so years, now that we've had the technology, the DNA sequencing technology to explore these microbiomes a lot better. Before that, we relied on classical culture techniques, and with those kind of techniques, we can only really find out about maybe 1% of the microbes that are around us. So with this is one of the reasons that began kind of this explosion in microbiome research, and how we began to discover now that the microbiome is so important in health. And I guess now we're turning to fermented foods. There has been, as we mentioned, it's been over 100 years, I suppose, since this research started, and it hasn't made a huge amount of headway in most of that time. And now we're looking at fermented foods and some of the potential health benefits. And many so far have shown to have positive outcomes in certain health conditions such as type 2 diabetes, obesity, mental health, as you mentioned. It's very early days for this research, so we've like a pyramid of evidence, and these will be kind of, a lot of these studies will be lower down on this in terms of they're done in cell lines or they're observational studies. There's only a few so far that are of the kind of top standard of scientific research.
Yeah.
We're trying to get there with it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm obviously not a scientist, but I have been running the Ballymaloe Cookery School since 1983, and students literally come from all over the world, different ages, different nationalities, all kinds of different backgrounds, all kinds of different eating habits. And the longest course we do is a 12-week course. So they're with us for 12 weeks. Now, for all this length of time, I have gradually become more and more aware of how they're of the difference in their health from the time, improvement to a great extent, and in their health from the time they come until the time they leave. Now, there are various reasons for this. First and foremost, we're eating a huge diversity of foods. They're eating different foods every single day for 3 months because they're learning how to cook different things every day. So that hugely impacts on their health. One of the first things I noticed, interestingly, I don't know whether there's any research being done on this, or it's the difference in their skin. Any of them that have stomach problems, the stomach problems seem to sort of disappear. Now, of course, this is just anecdotal. These are my observations and indeed my teachers' observations here at the school and the students' observations themselves. Now, this is what you scientists call anecdotal evidence. And anecdotal evidence, I know, is a swear word to scientists. It has to be proved by science. But there's no, in my mind, at this point, having watched this and observed this for over decades, I would say this is an area that the research is going to be very interesting when it comes out. Also, there's a growing body of research, of course, in all of the different areas there, but there's some research from a couple of years ago there, they did it on teenagers and college students because, as you'll probably know, John, there's a really frightening increase in anxiety levels among young people particularly and students. And it's a real worry. And so, college students, for example, they often have a limited budget. They limited cooking facilities, limited cooking skills, and all of that can combine to result in a nutritionally deficient diet. And they went in the research, they could see a clear link between sort of quite a limited diet, because diversity is the key for our microbiome. Basically, they could see with this limited diet of very often high-end ultra-processed foods was definitely impacting on their mental health and their anxiety levels as well. So that was quite an interesting and worrying thing. But certainly, it's just really interesting to know that, when the word bacteria, as I said earlier, people are sometimes really scared of. But basically everywhere we look, there's bacteria. Not even when we look there, we can't see them for a start. And so many of them are good and beneficial to our health, and we have to harness them to actually enhance what's going on in our gut. Because as far as I understand, there can be, almost up to 2 kilos of bacteria and microbes in our gut biome. And all of those are all different, and they're all needing different kinds of food and so on. And I often think, so the wider variety of food we eat, the more you're nourishing each and every single one of those, and the more diverse our gut microbiome, and the healthier both our physical and mental health will be. So certainly fermented foods are part of that, and also a great believer in if you can get really good raw milk, preferably from a small herd of organic cows, pasture-fed cows, raw milk cheeses again, and don't forget to eat the rind, of course, but not the plastic coat or anything, but the real natural rind, really good natural yogurt that one can make so easily at home oneself, again with good milk. The kimchis, and then the other thing about those, the kefirs, the kefirs, as we spoke about earlier there, John, particularly the water kefir as well. That's it's like fermented sugar water, and you add, at the moment we're adding elderflowers to it, rose petals, dates, whatever, and indeed for that matter it could be some fruit or vegetables that were left over. You could put those into the second fermentation, but they make this amazing fizzy drink called water kefir that of course is full of goodness, and children love it as well. All my grandchildren love it, or their friends love it, and this is a brilliant way to substitute a really good, beneficial, healthy drink for kids who would normally be looking for bottles of the well-known brands.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you on that. Another few interesting points about, anecdotes can be a bit of a swear word sometimes, I guess, to scientists, in terms of we can't publish on them, but I do think there's a lot of value in them, because it's anecdotes.
And the science often catches up with it in the end, the funny thing, isn't it?
Well, exactly, and it's anecdotes that really lead us to answer these questions in a much more controlled way, but the anecdotes have a lot of value, and we're both coming at this from very different perspectives, and I think it's fascinating that we're both hopefully coming to the same conclusion. We still have the research to do, but we are very optimistic about the beneficial effects of fermented foods. You raised another good point as well I wanted to ask you, because when I started eating fermented foods, when I started studying them, I decided to get brave and try some of them. And I know when I first made things like sauerkraut and kimchi, they can be a little bit off-putting maybe. I love them now, but I have to be honest.
Well, they're definitely, John, an acquired taste for any of us. There's no doubt about it. And I suppose it's good to realise, well, you don't need to have a whole plate of any of these. In fact, you'd be much better off not to have a whole plate of it, because your gut wouldn't know what hit it suddenly. But a little teaspoon in a sandwich, or of sauerkraut in a sandwich, or on with a little salad or something. That's what you need, John, isn't it? A little teaspoon or tablespoon of kimchi or sauerkraut, even for sometimes at breakfast. Very beneficial. What do you think?
Yeah, it starts out like that with some of the harder to eat foods, but it's far more than a teaspoon for me now for sauerkraut and kimchi.
Yeah.
One last question, Darina, before we move on to the next topic. What would you recommend? You were mentioning water kefir. Would that be a good way for people who are a little bit nervous?
Oh, John, I think water kefir is a real gateway into fermenting, because the word fermenting is sort of a bit, again, it sounds a bit mysterious to many people, but honestly, you know now, and I know how simple it is to get started on something like water kefir, and indeed milk kefir. And I love this. That you start off with little granules that usually one person passes to another, and then you take them out of the batch you've just made, you wash them off, and you put them into a jar or into a glass or something, and pour some fresh milk over it, and then leave it overnight, and hey presto, you have this lovely, thick, beautiful, super nutritious milk kefir a day or two later. And you keep on passing it on to your friends, and that's happened all over the world pretty much since time began. And, they absorb them. It's interesting that a milk kefir can taste different in different parts of the world, because like everything else, it's like the importance of eating the local foods of our area, because they actually they contain the antibodies of our area. The honey, the eggs, the milk. Years ago, we ate so much local food, and definitely. Now, again, I'm an scientist, but I will be very surprised if we don't discover that there's a link between the fact that nowadays so many of us eat so little local food. Most of the food that we eat comes off the shelves in the supermarkets, and it may have come from anywhere in the world, carrying bacteria and microbes from that our systems have never really contended with. So to realize the importance of eating as much fresh local food in season as we possibly can. I mean, same old. It's back to the same thing. The best for us is real food in season, chemical-free, as far as organic, biodynamic, whatever you like to call it, but anyway, chemical-free. So that's really what we need to really go out. And the other thing, John, I don't know whether you're into wild and forage foods yet, but I'm a real foraging nerd as well. And so this is really another area of, I often say, it's a forgotten skill to be able to recognize the foods in the wild. And I reckon about a very high percentage of the food that grows all around us in the plants and everything else. When I say food, I mean I'm talking about what normally people would call weeds and that grow all around us are actually edible. But basically they're incredibly good for us and for our gut biome, because you see the wild foods haven't been tampered with in any way to actually produce the maximum yield for the minimum cost, which is the main focus in mass-produced foods. And they have so many vitamins, minerals, trace elements, enzymes, all sorts of things that are incredibly good for our biodiversity, for the diversity of our gut again. So I would say you could start off by eating a dandelion leaf a day. So that's another whole area apart from fermentation that's incredibly, I feel, enormously important for both our physical and our mental health as well, because it's all connected into diversity of food to feed all those hungry little microbes in our gut.
And sustainable as well. I've tried to
sustainable, exactly, yeah.
I've tried a little bit to dip my toes into foraging. I bought a mushroom book last year to help me identify it, but I have a feeling I'll go out and kill myself by eating the wrong one.
Actually, talking about a gateway into foraging, mushrooms are not the place to start, because there sure are mushrooms that could do you in. Now, I mean, obviously many of us will know what ordinary field mushrooms, which are in some ways some of the most delicious of all, look like. But there are much more, familiar things like dandelions, nettles, watercress, hazelnuts, all of those sort of things, damsonsloes, all of those that you can recognize more easily. So I'd say take somebody out who really knows, recognizes the mushrooms before you head off on that one, John.
No, that experiment is too risky to do on my own, I think. Just to move on to the reuse of food waste. So I guess I'll segue into this with fermentation. When I buy carrots, for instance, to make a dinner, and I might only use half of the bag, in the past, I have to hold my hands up, I was guilty of letting a lot of those carrots go off before I use them again. But I found fermentation, like I could just stick the carrots, chop them up a bit and put them in some brine, typically about 2%, and I can pickle them and they'll last a long time. But I guess this is definitely an area where you would have much more expertise. You run a 100-acre farm, so could you tell us a little bit more about how you reuse food waste, and perhaps give the listeners an idea of what is practical to do at home as well on a smaller scale?
Oh yeah, well, we are really lucky to live in the middle of a farm, and we've been farming organically now for nearly 30 years actually, and we grow a very, very wide variety of fruit and vegetables and herbs and everything for the students to cook with, as well as everything else. But basically, and because I'm I'm 72 years of age now, John, and I was brought up at a time when I can tell you waste was not an option. I'm the eldest of 9 children, and it was just out of the question that you would leave anything on your plate. And in fact, sometimes my brother would say, look up at the cobweb or something on the ceiling, and if you looked up, when you look back down again, the sausage would be missing off your plate or something. Food waste was not an option. We get a chip in the ear first. So this is deeply ingrained in my psyche, is that wasting any good food is really bad. And not only that, it's not just bad, but you can make something delicious from it. So indeed, using fermenting and pickling, all of that is terrific. But apart from that, we have, this is sort of slightly a segue going away from the fermented, the gut biome, so to speak, but it all comes down in a circle anyway. So one of the things that we have, and I feel everybody should try and have a few hens, because the scraps that are left over, that very often that we don't compost, and composting is incredibly important as well. I'll go back to that in a moment. But the scraps that don't go into the stock pot, and stock, by the way, and broths are incredibly important also for the health of your gut and our own health, get the maximum from for example, if you're making a chicken stock, you get or beef stock, you get all that collagen from the bones that gives us the extra calcium we so badly need. So something is going to the stock pot, whatever qualifies for the stock pot. It could be leftover, some leftover vegetables and herbs and things like that, as well as the carcasses and bones. Then other food that doesn't qualify for the stock pot goes to the hens. It comes back as eggs a few days later. So that's a really, really important thing. And then whatever's left over from that goes onto the compost heap. And that's incredibly important. It's composted down for about 8 or 9 months. And then when life comes back into it again, when it's at the humus stage, that is then put back onto the soil to make the soil more fertile. And then when the soil is more fertile, we grow even more nutritious vegetables and fruit and everything. So, and in the end, talk about going back to fundamentals. It's all about the soil. Basically, we are totally dependent for our very existence on the 3 or 4 inches of soil all around the world, and all the trillions of enzymes and bacteria and everything that's in the soil. And here I could, in a way, I could quote Lady Eve Balfour, and I quote this to every batch of students that come to the school, because I have just shocked them out of thinking that food is something that comes wrapped in plastic off a supermarket shelf. I want them to think about how food is produced and where it comes from. And I quote Lady Eve Balfour, who was one of the founders of the Soil Association, and what she reminded us was, remember, the health of the soil, the health of the plant, the health of the animal, and the health of the human are all connected. And basically, we are only as healthy as we are. We only have the sort of real food, nourishing food, depending on how fertile that soil is. So I've sort of gone off on a slight little tangent, but in the end, everything, the health of our gut biome, everything goes back to the health of the soil.
Yeah, you raised a few very good points there. I do want to ask you about growing your own food now in a minute.
Yeah.
But with the composting, I think it's a good chance to plug the microbes again here, because it's World Microbiome Day and sustainability, and it's these microbes in your composting that help to recycle all the nutrients, carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, and these are essential in various different forms that aren't always available to the plants, but the microbes make them available. And the soil microbiome in particular, one of the most complex ecosystems on the planet, is extremely important for this and for sustainability and for a lot of the activities that you carry out in your farm. When I was reading up a little bit about this, because my expertise are fermented foods and this is a little bit outside of my comfort zone, but I saw a really interesting stat that if food waste was a country, it would be the 3rd highest producer of carbon after the US and China. So some of these facts are mind-blowing.
Yeah.
And
well, honestly, one doesn't have to waste a single a scrap of any kind of real food, because in all of these ways it can be recycled and come back in a wonderful holistic cycle back to us again. So,
what practical tips would you have for?
Pardon?
What practical tips might you have for somebody listening that they could do at home to reduce their own food waste?
Well, I mean, ask yourself, could you get a little chicken coop and have a couple of hens on your lawn? They'll mow your lawn for you and move them around anyway. And it's win-win all the way because, I mean, I could talk for Ireland on hens and compost actually, because I feel so strongly about the two of them. But basically, if you have a couple of hens, if you have 3 or 4 hens, they would eat all the leftover scraps from the house. And then you have these beautiful, eggs a couple of days later. The manure then can go onto the back onto your compost heap, and then helps to activate the compost, and as you say, with the bacteria and all of that, and then that's when the lovely compost comes back onto the soil to make the soil more fertile. Plus, you don't have to pay the council to take away your food waste. And so it's win-win all the way. So that's one way. That's one way of doing it. And of course, the other hugely important thing, John, is for each and every one of us to learn how to cook. Even the very basics. And actually, I feel so strongly about this in a way because, and I feel in many ways that our education system is really actually we're failing in our duty of care to a great extent to our young people, because ever since I was, educated in the 50s and 60s, the very strong message in education has been that academic skills are of far more importance than practical skills. And as a result, we have let our children, generations of children out of our houses and out of our schools without equipping them with the basic skills to feed themselves properly and with basic housekeeping skills. I mean, housekeeping may sound for many people like drudgery, but what are we like? Basically, if you can't cook, and it's not rocket science, you don't have to be able to do all sorts of fancy stuff, but just a few basic skills. If you can't cook, not only can you not feed yourself and your family well and inexpensively when you can cook, because if you can cook, you can make a delicious supper out of a cabbage and a couple of potatoes and a few little things, but also you don't have the skills to use up leftovers in a delicious way. So there needs to be, if you can cook, and if you have hens and compost, there don't have to be any food waste at all, because you can use every single scrap deliciously. So that, and I really hope that I live to see the day, and it won't be from the lack of lobbying on my part and many other people's as well. I hope I live to see the day when cooking, practical cooking, and indeed for that matter, John, actual gardening and showing people how to grow food. Cooking and gardening is embedded in the national curriculum. And as far as I'm concerned, we're failing in our duty of care to our young people by not doing that. And it's more and more evident the impact on people's health because we don't have these skills any longer, which used to be passed on from indeed mother to daughter and one generation to another.
Yeah, it's an excellent point. I mean, I wasn't blessed with enormous cooking skills when I left home, and given how important the diet is for the microbiome and how important the microbiome is for health, and using fresh, unprocessed ingredients, a wide diversity of fibres and plant material, I think cooking is an essential skill that is certainly overlooked. And just because of time here, you were talking about growing foods as well when we're talking about compost, and I think this is something as well I think the listeners could get a lot of value from. If I've tried my hand at growing a few things at a small greenhouse at one stage, and I grew some tomatoes and peppers and herbs, but not always correctly. Could you perhaps talk a little bit about growing food at home and practical ways again that people could adopt this?
Another point I suppose it would be really good to make is about the joy and the importance of growing something yourself. I mean, it doesn't matter whether you live in the country or whether you live in the city, whether you live in a high-rise block of apartments or something. Everybody can grow something, a little of their own food. And it just makes such a difference. All you need to grow something is you need some kind of container. It could actually be a recycled box or a drawer or anything. You need to fill it with soil or compost or a mixture. You need a seed, you need water, you need light to activate the seed and the growth, and then you need a little bit of patience to wait for it to grow into something. And so even if you just have a windowsill, you can grow salad leaves, you can grow radishes, you can grow lovely little wispy carrots, lots of different things. And my goodness me, if you sow a seed and wait for it to grow into something to eat, the anticipation, the actual joy of growing something and the magic of it, not to speak of the flavour, plus you will not spray it with any pesticides or herbicides or anything, because you know you're going to be eating it. Every single bite of that will do you good. And then, and as well as that, if you involve the children, show them how to sow seeds as well, they absolutely love it. And the amazing thing is they eat absolutely everything. If children sow a seed and I'll plant something into the ground and wait for it to grow, they will eat everything. They'll eat broccoli, spinach, all the things that you thought they would never eat. Peas are fantastic as well. Plus, if you, for example, beets, also very often, if you grow something yourself, you get double or triple value from it. And let me give you a couple of examples. For example, if you grow beetroot normally, if you buy it in the shop, supermarket, you just buy the beets, the little bulb at the end. Now, when we have beets, we pull them out of the ground, we eat them from the time that they're about the size of a table tennis ball, and then the stalks, you would chop up those and cook them in a little boiling salt of water, toss them next to virgin olive oil and maybe some herbs and a little chili flakes or something, and they're delicious as a vegetable. And then you also have the leaves, and the leaves then you can eat when they're young, like spinach or whatever, in a salad, or you can cook them as well like a green. So you get 3 vegetables out of one there, 3 times the value. The same with radishes. We eat the leaves. The leaves are absolutely delicious. We eat them in salads, and we also make them into a soup as well, radish leaf soup. So there are lots of things that are just never make it onto the supermarket shelves. I can tell you if you grow your own. Do you know what's also delicious, John? If you have cauliflower, now I'm very bad at growing cauliflower, but if you grow cauliflower, when you get them in the supermarket, they're kind of, only the leaves are kind of cut off, and it's the same with leeks for that matter. There are just a few leeks. But the actual leaves of cauliflower are absolutely delicious roasted as well, tossed in a little olive oil. And then, of course, you can eat the white, you cook the curd and the curdy part in lots of different ways. So to encourage, I really would love to encourage people, and many people have discovered it, particularly during the last year and a half, through the COVID period when people have more time. Many people have also not only spent more time in the kitchen, but also in the garden. And so that's been a very positive thing. But for our listeners who haven't yet discovered that magic, I would really encourage them to, and also not to be too ambitious. Don't plant too many seeds together, because what happens is then you can't cope with it. Either you have a glut, which of course you can ferment, or pickle, or freeze, or make jams, all those things, or chutneys. But basically, if you plant too much, you get overwhelmed and you think, I can't do this. So don't be too ambitious. Maybe link up with a friend and say, well, look, you grow the tomatoes and cucumbers, and I'll grow the lettuces and the beets, and we'll swap around,
Yeah, I was guilty of that too. I planted way too tomatoes the first time round, and it was fine until they all grew a bit, but then they were in a greenhouse, they got overcrowded, and I think a lot of them got blight, so... Oh,
yes, that's right. And you mightn't have done enough side shooting. That's a whole other area again, isn't it? So,
yeah.
But anyway, it is, so that's a common thing to happen, John, where you're too ambitious, you get all fired up, too ambitious, and then you become overwhelmed. But there we are.
Some of the beetroot stuff, I didn't know about all the different edible parts. I'm used to, unfortunately, getting it in a supermarket all ready to go. What kind of space would you need? Just beetroot is one example.
John, honestly, you need very little space. I mean, at the cooking school, we actually have an area, a quite small area. Actually, I can't remember the size of it, 40 by something, which we call, it's like we call it the urban garden, but actually it's like a classroom an outdoor classroom to to show the students on the sustainable food production course and on our other courses how small a little small area that you might have behind a house in a terrace in a town or in a city, quite a small area that you can actually literally have vegetables and some fruits and herbs and everything, edible flowers, right throughout the year. You'll have something from it, everything from kale and spinach and beans and peas, and it's amazing. You don't need a very big area, and you'd be better off particularly to start off with a small area. If you can get an allotment, well, that's terrific too. A little tunnel is a great help, but honestly, if you start off by a little bed, sort of about 8 by 2.5, it needs to be not too wide so you can stretch in from both sides, or 3 feet. You'd be amazed how much you can grow in it. And if you link up with a couple of pals and get them to grow something different in their little bed, and then you can go on from there. You can get more ambitious next year.
That sounds very encouraging, and something that most of us hopefully are capable of, and space doesn't seem to be an issue. Yeah,
and actually, John, one other thing about growing things yourself, actually everybody's busy and everybody's trying to keep all the balls in the air. But on it, there are annuals. In other words, you sow the seed and you get the crop that year. And then there are also perennials, both vegetables and flowers. Perennials are great because they come back year after year. So things like rhubarb, and there are lots of vegetables that are perennial, as well as fruits and things like that. So that's good because, and there's another terrific, talking about the gut biome, we almost forgot to mention Jerusalem artichokes, John. Those are the root artichokes, that, not the ones that look like a thistle, but they grow underground. They're sometimes called sunchokes, so they're like knobbly potatoes, and they're a wonderful winter vegetable. And you put one in the ground, and where you planted one, you'll have about 12 or 15, and they are fantastically good for your gut biome because they're the highest in inulin of any vegetable. And so what's inulin? Well, you give me a lovely scientific answer to that, but all I know is that basically it's the thing that, for example, if you have to go on a course of antibiotics or something, which we all have to do from time to time, hopefully as little as possible, but anyway, because they kill off a lot of the good bacteria and microbes in your gut as well. But anyway, supposing you have to go on a course of antibiotics, well, if you then can get hold of some Jerusalem artichokes, and you can roast them or make soup or do whatever like with it, they actually reintroduce the really good beneficial bacteria back into your gut, and they'll rebuild your good beneficial bacteria in your gut very, very quickly. Whereas if you're just living mostly on a diet of ultra-processed foods, it takes ages, and you may find yourself going down with something else and something else week after week. So look out for Jerusalem artichokes. To get them in now more and more in farmers markets in the winter, and they're in season from kind of about the end of November to about March, and they're really, really worth knowing about.
It was a really nice way to tie in the growing and bring it all back to the microbiome. Jerusalem artichoke is one of the highest in inulin, and we know that fibres, inulin is a type of fibre. These are excellent prebiotics. Yeah. They encourage the growth.
And we should really say, John, shouldn't we, that of course fruit and vegetables, they are the greatest source of roughage. And again, I'm always talking chemical-free, organic, if at all possible, so your body doesn't have to fight against. At this stage, we really can't say we don't know the damage that the residues of pesticides and herbicides are doing to our health. But basically, fruit and vegetables, they contain the fibre. So lots and lots of those, and they can't be digested by our gut, but they provide the essential, they're called prebiotics as well, and they provide the essential prebiotics, which the probiotics the really good bacteria in our gut feed on. Am I right about that, John?
Yeah, fibre and diversity in fibre, getting lots of different fibre sources.
Lots of different ones, exactly.
So
in the end, I suppose, it all boils down to same old, eat as wide a variety of real food as one possibly can, fresh in season, because nature always seems to provide the food that we need at that time of the year. Isn't it interesting how, in the winter with all the vitamin C and the blackberries and all the blueberries, all that we need, provide exactly what we need to keep us strong and healthy throughout the winter and all of that. So nature, real food, fresh food, and lots of it, and as wide a variety as possible. I suppose, John, we could say it's all about the diversity in the end, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's a really nice take-home point, Darina. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and a huge thank you to everyone who has joined us this morning. For our listeners, if we've whetted your appetite this morning, why not check out all the events happening for World Microbiome Day? There's a great one happening tomorrow at 7 p.m. My colleagues at APC will be answering all your questions about microbes, microbiomes and sustainability. So I really encourage you to take a look at that one, which we will link below for you. And also we'll be sharing the details of our rescheduled microbiome-friendly brunch with Darina very soon, so please keep an eye out for that. That's all from myself and Darina. Thanks again for joining us on World Microbiome Day.